Hello everyone. Today's topic is body cavities. A body cavity is any space or compartment or potential space in an animal body. Cavities accommodate organs and other structures. Cavities as potential space contain fluid. The two large human body cavities are ventral body cavity and dorsal body cavity. In the dorsal body cavity, the brain and spinal cord are located. The membrane that surround the central nervous system, organs, the brain, the spinal cord in cranial and spinal cavities. Three three meaning the definitely line space contain different type of fluid in the mezzanine. For example, the fluid is crust fluid. The abnormal cavity in fluid contained in the peritoneum is a serous fluid. In amniotes and some interpreted the peritoneum line their largest body cavity called column. The dorsal cavity and ventral cavity are the largest body compartments. The dorsal body cavity include the cranial cavity enclosed by the skull and contain contain the brain. The spinal cavity enclosed by the spine and contain the spinal cord. The ventral body cavity include uh, the thoracic cavity enclosed by rib cage and contain the lung and heart, and the abdominopelvic cavity. The abdominopelvic cavity can be divided into the abdominal cavity enclosed by the rib cage and pelvis and contain the kidney, ureterus, SOT, match, intestine, liver, gallbladder, pancreas, and pelvic cavity enclosed by the pelvic and contain bladder, anus, and reproductive system. The ventral cavity has two main subdivisions: the thoracic cavity and abdominopelvic cavity. The thoracic cavity is more superior subdivision. The ventral cavity and is enclosed by the rib cage. The thoracic cavity contain the lungs surrounded by the pleural cavity and surrounded by the pericardial cavity located in the mediastinum. The diaphragm formed the floor of thoracic cavity and separated it from the more inferior abdominopelvic cavity. The dorsal cavity contains the cranial cavity and the spinal cavity. The cranial cavity is large bean-shaped cavity filling the most of upper skull where the brain is located. The spinal cavity is the very narrow thread-like cavity running from the cranial cavity down the entire length of the spinal cord. The dorsal cavity is cranial cavity houses the brain, and the spinal cavity encloses the spinal cord, just as the brain and spinal cord make up continuous continuous uninterrupted structure in the cranial and spinal cavities that house them are also continuous. The brain and spinal cord are protected by bone and skull and vertebral column and by cerebrospinal fluid, a colorless fluid produced by brain which cushion the brain and spinal cord within the dorsal body cavity. Thank you.